Hi, welcome to Foreign Affairs Focus on Books. I'm Justin Vogt, books editor here at Foreign Affairs. We're joined today by Ananya Vajpeyi, who is an intellectual historian based at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies in New Delhi, India. And Ananya is also the author of a review essay in the current issue of Foreign Affairs, the September-October edition. Ananya, thanks so much for joining us. Your article is titled The Triumph of the Hindu Right. And this term, Hindu right or Hindu nationalist, has come up a lot in coverage of India, right. Especially in the past year with the election of the new government led by Narendra Modi, who's often referred to as a Hindu nationalist. Can you explain what is Hindu nationalism?
Hindu nationalism is a political ideology that sort of dates back to the early mid-20th century. That basically believes that or proposes that the nationhood of India be strictly tied to its Hindu identity. So it basically posits the national community as being the same as the religious community of Hindus. And
of course, India is made up of more than just Hindus. I mean, India
yes,
is actually a fairly diverse society.
In fact, India is a democratic nation state. It's the world's largest democracy. It has 1.2 billion people. And of those, 80% are in some sense Hindus, but 20% are not. And in absolute numbers, that's a humongous number of people who are Muslims, Christians, Jews, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, tribals, and a variety of other faiths as well, Parsis and so on.
The Hindu nationalists sort of view these groups as somehow less Indian, or what's the view of the minority groups?
Well, I mean, the Indian constitution and the principle of Indian nationhood, which came into existence after independence between 1947 and 1950, makes citizenship the basis of your nationality. So regardless of your religion or your caste or your gender or your ethnicity or any other kind of description of your identity, you're an Indian citizen, and that is the primary definition of being Indian. So minorities, religious minorities, are not in any way at a disadvantage vis-a-vis their Indianness relative to the majority community, which happens to be Hindus. But according to Hindu nationalism, technically we are all Indian citizens, but really somehow Hindus are more Indian, and everybody else is kind of there on sufferance. And has to constantly establish that their political allegiance, their emotional and cultural and historical allegiance is to India, but that's not obvious, or rather that's actually probably not true because they happen to belong to a religious community other than the Hindu. And that directly kind of contradicts the principle of citizenship, which is enshrined in the Constitution.
Groups like this, groups that espouse a Hindu nationalist line, were behind a campaign that you write about in your piece to essentially ban or to prevent the sale and publication of a recent book by an American scholar of Hinduism, Wendy Doniger.
Right.
What is it about Doniger's work that so angers Hindu nationalists?
Well, Wendy Doniger is a very senior scholar. She's been at the University of Chicago, and she's been writing about India and various aspects of Indian culture and Hindu religion for decades. So her latest sort of two books, one is called On Hindus, and the other is called, one is called Hindus, The Hindus, the other is called On Hinduism. They're a kind of culmination of a lifetime of her scholarship. So it's not that she's suddenly come out of nowhere. She's very well known, and she takes a very broad view. So she really writes about the entire history of the existence of this religious, civilizational, cultural community, or a whole series of communities that can be described under this umbrella. And she likes to emphasize the less orthodox and the less puritanical aspects of the faith, of which there are many. And she likes to talk about what happens in the faith to women, to marginal groups, to lower castes, to excluded communities, which nonetheless sort of belong in the family of Hinduism. And she often writes about playful and earthy and erotic and aesthetic aspects of the sort of cultural fabric of Hinduism. And she likes to emphasize those because she, like many of us, understands that Hinduism is actually very capacious and complex, and it's hard to, really narrow it down in the way that Hindu nationalists like to do.
So were they successful in this effort to kind of shut out these more unorthodox views of hers? I mean, what happened?
Lived Hinduism is really very, very diverse and pretty unorthodox, I would say, for the most part. Like most lived religions, I would say. And when Wendy Doniger's books are not sort of, they're not trying to tell Hindus what to do. They're actually describing, over the course of a long history, through many hundreds and thousands of texts, what has gone on in India by way of its the history of its religious life. Mm-hmm. So they're not prescriptive in that sense. But Hindu nationalist groups, some of which are in politics and some of which are sort of cultural organizations, mm-hmm. Took objection to her sort of wide-ranging survey of the religion. And basically, just before this new government came to power in the early part of this year, in February, what happened was that one of her books came out in 2009-10, and already at the time that it came out, this particular small group went to the publisher, to Penguin India, and said, "We object to this book because it's too sexy, basically. And we think it insults and offends our religious sentiments, and it doesn't take Hinduism seriously." And India has certain laws in the Indian Penal Code that allow the curtailing of the freedom of expression, mm-hmm. should that particular form of expression offend somebody's religious sensibilities or incite communal passions. So, in theory, there's freedom of speech, but it can be curtailed in this way, right? There's kind of limits to it because of these particular laws.
And so the publisher sort of preemptively...
So using these laws mm-hmm. as a threat, mm-hmm. that we'll sue you under these laws because these laws would potentially allow us to make our case, this group went to Penguin. Penguin tried to fight that off as best they could. They tried to settle, they tried to negotiate, they let things lie. 4 years passed, 5 years passed. And finally, before actually going into court and fighting it in the court, Penguin decided that they would simply make a settlement, say, okay, fine, whatever, you're right. We'll withdraw this book, we'll stop selling it, and we'll pulp all existing copies.
Now you wrote in the piece that this sort of victory for the Hindu nationalists...
Well, they went to town. I mean, as soon as Penguin made this... capitulation in a sense, and we don't really know why they did it, because they could have, they had the option to actually fight it through the courts, and many legal experts say that potentially actually freedom of speech would have won out mm-hmm. over this business of hurting Hindu sentiments, right. which this group was claiming. But we don't know because they never tried it. And then, of course, this group went to town and said, "Oh, look, not only has Penguin India backed down, but we actually have a long list of things that we object to and that we think are not properly, representing the Hindu faith and that are potentially insulting to our sentiments and are offensive to our feelings, etc. And we're going to go after all these books and all these authors, and we're going to do it, to not only teach them a lesson, but also to make up for the fact that all this while, the left and the liberal and the secular intelligentsia have basically, continually humiliated Hindus through producing a certain kind of scholarship and a certain kind of opinion.
Modi is now in office.
Right.
He's a
So
figure
a month
that is
later,
related to these groups in some
exactly.
sense. Yeah.
A month or two later, we went into elections, and the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, which is the Hindu nationalist party, actually won, a clear majority and was able to form a government without coalition partners, because they had enough seats in the parliament. And now, it's a kind of carte blanche for these groups, which all this time have existed, have been kind of marginal, have never enjoyed any kind of political limelight, because the consensus was always that freedom of speech is important, and scholarship should be about facts, not about a political ideology that actually excludes and tries to marginalize minorities. But now these people feel that the political regime actually stands behind them solidly, and now they can really proceed with their plan that they had been threatening to proceed with, to examine and possibly fix all kinds of problematic art, scholarship, intellectual production,
More broadly,
speech.
now we're in the very early stages of the Modi era. There's been this question as to whether Modi would govern sort of as a technocrat, a pro-market reformer, or whether his background as a Hindu nationalist ideologue and activist would be more prominent or more prominently on display.
Right.
So far, we're in very early innings. It's only
Right.
maybe 4 or 5 months. But
Not
what's
even,
the sense on the ground of Modi, the direction he's taking right now?
Well, Modi is the face of the Hindu right, and now the Prime Minister. But he bundles together like a sort of spectrum of what it means to be right wing. So that includes certain kinds of economic policies, certain kinds of political beliefs, and certain broadly cultural, ideological, ideas, and includes some ideas about religion and religious politics, right? So what everyone was very uncertain about is which part of this spectrum is going to be politically salient and prominent once he comes to power. And it's still out. The jury is still out. We don't really know because it's been a very short time. He hasn't made any strong policy pronouncements of an economic nature or any other nature for that matter. But what we do see is that there does seem to be space for more than the rhetoric of development, growth, and economic reform, and that these so-called cultural organizations and leaders and ideologues do feel empowered to come out into a public space that had so far sort of stigmatized them or ignored them or made fun of them, and say more and more. It's almost like it's like they're daring the liberals and the left and a variety of other people who might be agnostic to they're trying to sense how much can we say that will be tolerated or accepted. And they are making these pronouncements, and they're actually also, the government in quiet ways is appointing people like this to head up institutions, archives, national libraries, social science and humanities institutions of various kinds. And they're just testing the waters. I think they're they know that it's an uphill battle in the culture wars, because they've never had this kind of a political opportunity before.
It'll be interesting to see how they push forward.
But it was actually, I mean, it all started off in this very unfortunate way that, had Penguin kind of fought the good fight, and if we had a legal precedent actually, and chances are that the courts would have actually upheld the right to publish this book, then it would have felt less like an emergency, because now it seems like we have nothing much to go on by way of a legal precedent. And if they want to start attacking other books, and they have shown signs of doing that, then other publishers might also want to back down or just say, okay, this is not a fight we can win, and it's better to just accept the changed political scenario.
Battle of political wills in India will continue.
Yeah.
Ananya, thank you very much for your insight and for coming here today to join us.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure working with you.